My wife said, "Don't be clingy. People might think we're actually a couple." I walked away, silently. Minutes later, her new boss grabbed her arm, white as a sheet. "Do you realize who you just embarrassed in front of the board?" She did not whisper it. She broadcast it loud enough for her colleagues to laugh, loud enough for the sting to settle into my chest like a quietly lodged piece of shrapnel that you do not feel until you try to breathe. I was still holding her bag when she said it. Her small leather clutch, the one she had handed me without looking up, the way you hand something to a valet, like a bellhop who had overstepped his station. No introduction, no name, not even a glance back in my direction. Just a smile aimed at the catering manager standing beside the stone fountain, and a dismissal aimed at me. Clean, casual, and surgical in the way only practiced cruelty can be. I looked at the bag in my hand for a moment. I looked at the back of her head, the careful way her hair was arranged, the tension in her shoulders that only I would notice, the performance already fully underway. Then I set the bag down gently on the gravel path, right there beside a low boxwood hedge, and I walked the other direction. Past the fire pit with its amber light catching the edge of the stone seating wall. Down the long path paved in flat granite. Out through the archway of climbing hydrangea, still blooming in the early evening, still fragrant in a way that felt almost insulting given what had just happened. Out toward the lake, where the noise from the terrace faded behind me until it became just a low murmur, and then nothing at all. The estate sprawled across over 40 acres of manicured land. Old money taste with new money lighting. Copper fixtures lining every path. Topiaries clipped into shapes that required a full-time staff to maintain. I had seen it before, though not from the inside. The property once belonged to a subsidiary I quietly restructured during the 2008 crash. I had recognized the distinctive hedge curve near the eastern boundary the moment we pulled through the gate from aerial survey photographs taken during due diligence. Photographs I had held in my own hands at a conference table that no longer exists in a building that has since been renamed. Everything they thought was theirs, the gravel and the copper and the 40 acres, was built on handshakes and signatures I had released without ever asking for my name to appear anywhere. I liked it that way. I had always liked it that way. Legacy does not need a nameplate, but disrespect has a scent, and it followed her tonight like overpriced perfume from a bottle she bought to feel like someone else. I stood under a wide oak tree near the water. The bark was rough against my palm when I rested my hand against it. The lake caught the last of the evening light in long, pale strips, broken only by the occasional ripple from something moving beneath the surface. From this distance, I could see her back by the champagne station, working the room with the precision of someone who had studied it. That rehearsed laugh, open and effortless, landing exactly one beat after the punchline to make it feel spontaneous. That particular tilt of the chin she used when she wanted someone to feel chosen. She was magnetic, and she knew it. Young, polished, fluent in the language of rooms like this, and genuinely dangerous to anyone who mistook a flawless impression for an actual set of values. I watched her without anger. I want to be clear about that. What I felt standing there under that oak tree was something closer to grief. The particular grief of recognizing a moment you cannot unlearn. The moment when the person you married stops being who you thought they were and simply becomes who they have always been. Then I saw him. Her new boss. Tan face, square jaw, slick posture. That specific post-private equity glow of a man who had not heard the word no in at least 5 years and had started to mistake that silence for intelligence. He stepped out onto the upper balcony that overlooked the lawn, drink in one hand, phone in the other. The kind of man who always has both. His eyes moved across the property with the habitual sweep of someone assessing value in everything he looks at. Then his eyes found me. They stopped. I watched it happen from 60 feet below him, the way his body went completely still, the way the casual authority drained out of his posture between one breath and the next. The drink moved slightly in his hand. The phone dropped slowly to his side. His mouth opened, and I could see from where I stood that no sound came out. Not immediately. He stood there for a full 3 or 4 seconds, which is an extraordinarily long time when you are doing nothing but staring at someone across a manicured lawn. I gave him one single nod. Not dramatic, not pointed. The kind of nod you give to someone at a funeral when you are both too far apart to speak, but close enough that ignoring them would say more than acknowledging them. Polite. Measured. The nod of a man tipping his hat to someone who remembers exactly where the load-bearing walls are, because he put them there himself. He turned and walked back inside without finishing his drink. What he had just recognized was not a title. It was not a press release or a profile in a financial quarterly. It was a name. The kind of name that does not appear on LinkedIn or in investor decks or in the forwarded email threads that junior associates use to impress each other. The kind attached to a private foundation that has quietly seeded capital into dozens of firms across 4 continents, including the one whose estate we were all standing on right now, sipping champagne from crystal that was purchased with restructured debt I personally guaranteed at 32 years old. During the 2008 crisis, when the entire architecture of leveraged investment was cracking at the seams, I had restructured 3 failing companies without taking a single dollar of public credit. No press release, no feature story, no handshake photograph in a trade publication. The first of those companies became the blind holding group that eventually purchased this very property, right down to the oak tree I was leaning against. The second was her boss's own employer. I had reinforced those walls personally, at a time when no one else would touch the structure without demanding majority control. I asked for nothing. I got nothing on paper. That was the point. The third company now controls a licensing portfolio, generating hundreds of millions annually, filtering through 3 global customs networks and approximately 80% of active maritime import ledgers in the Northern Hemisphere. She had never asked. In 4 years of marriage, she had never once sat down and asked me to explain what I actually did. She never wondered why I always recognized trap clauses in contracts before lawyers flagged them. Why compliance officers called me directly instead of going through channels. Why certain men in certain rooms went very quiet when I walked in. She once laughed at dinner with her friends and said, I gave off what she called off-brand billionaire vibes. Everyone laughed. I smiled and refilled her glass and let it go. I was good at letting things go. I am less good at it than I used to be. Back inside the estate, behind the smoked glass doors of the private boardroom on the 2nd floor, 3 men were pulling files. Not digital files, physical ones. Scanned documents printed and bound. Offline printouts pulled from archive binders that lived in locked drawers and not on any server. Pseudonyms being cross-referenced against deal memos from transactions that were never publicly recorded. A researcher had been quietly dispatched the moment her boss walked back through the balcony door and said a single name to the room in a voice that made everyone set down whatever they were holding. Michael, the senior board member in the gray suit, the one whose firm I had saved from a hostile delisting in 2011 by absorbing a debt load that would have destroyed 3 other investors, held a single sheet of paper. He did not speak for a long time. He simply looked at the name on the document. The real one. Not the foundation name, not the holding company name. The actual name, the one I was born with, the one that appears on 3 of the most consequential private agreements ever executed in this industry. Then he looked up and through the glass toward the lawn below, where she was still standing by the wine bar, still laughing, still glowing, still completely and utterly unaware. He brought him here, someone said. Someone else corrected quietly. She brought him here. And then she dismissed him in front of the entire event staff like he was nobody. Nobody said anything after that. The room did not need to discuss what it meant. Every person in that room understood immediately and completely what it meant for the firm, what it meant for the pending acquisition talks that her boss had been steering for the last 8 months. What it meant that the one man capable of either blessing or quietly destroying that entire transaction had just been handed a leather clutch and told not to embarrass anyone by the woman her boss had specifically brought in and promoted to build goodwill with exactly this kind of investor circle. Outside, I had not moved from the oak tree. I was still holding my glass of water, not champagne. I had stopped drinking at events like this years ago. Still wearing the worn jacket she had mocked at dinner 2 weeks ago for looking too low-end for a function at a private estate. I liked that jacket. The left pocket had a broken seam I had never gotten around to repairing. The right pocket held a folded note from a meeting I had attended 6 months prior, a meeting whose outcome she was currently standing 40 yards away from, completely unaware that she was surrounded by its consequences. I heard her laugh again from across the lawn. I looked down at the water. Then I saw her boss cross the grass toward her. His stride was not the easy, territorial walk of a man approaching his own event. It was the tight, controlled movement of someone managing a situation they did not create and cannot fully contain. His face was pale beneath the tan. Not sick pale. Pressure pale. The face of a man who has just understood the full weight of something and is still calculating how much of it is going to land on him specifically. She saw him coming and smiled. That reflex smile she gave to people she thought were about to compliment her. The open, receiving smile of someone who had grown accustomed to being told they had done well. He reached her and placed his hand firmly on her elbow, not affectionately, the way you grip someone's arm when you need them to stop moving and listen. Her smile adjusted slightly, reading the shift in register but not yet alarmed, not yet understanding. He leaned close to her and said something. 4 words, maybe 5. I could not hear them from where I stood, but I watched them land. I watched the color leave her face between 1 second and the next. The smile dissolved completely. Her head turned, slowly, as though she was afraid of what she would see, and her eyes scanned the lawn until they found me standing at the edge of the water. I did not wave. I did not move. I just stood there in the worn jacket, holding the glass of water, watching her discover the shape of the thing she had done. What he had said to her, I learned later from Michael, who told me over the phone 2 days afterward with the measured tone of a man delivering a verdict, was this. He had said, "Do you realize who you just embarrassed in front of the board?" Not a question. A statement delivered in the tone of someone reading damage aloud. She came to me at the edge of the water. Her heels made a different sound on the stone path than they had on the gravel. Slower, more deliberate. The confident rhythm completely gone. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me and opened her mouth, and I could see her working through the sequence of what to say, the explanation, the softening, the reframe. She was good at reframes. I spoke first. I told her that I was going to take the car back to the hotel. I told her in a quiet and even voice that I hoped the rest of her evening went well and that we could talk tomorrow if she wanted to. I did not say it with coldness. I said it with the particular kind of clarity that comes after a very long and patient understanding of something finally resolves into certainty. She said my name, just my name, in a voice I had not heard from her in a long time. I handed her the glass of water because she was going to need something to hold, and I walked back up the stone path through the hydrangea archway and past the fire pit, where 2 junior associates from her firm were talking too loudly about a deal they did not fully understand, and I got into the car and I drove back toward the hotel through the dark and the quiet. She called 4 times before I reached the highway. I did not answer. Not because I was punishing her, because I had nothing left to explain, and I knew that anything she said in that moment was going to be about managing the fallout and not about what she had actually done, and I was no longer interested in managing fallout. I had spent my entire professional life managing fallout for companies and institutions that never even knew my name. I was not going to do it for a marriage at the cost of what remained of my own dignity. The acquisition talks collapsed 6 weeks later. Not because of me, I want to be clear about that. I made no calls, I pulled no strings, I simply declined to participate when participation was requested through mutual intermediaries. My silence was enough. In a deal of that structure, at that stage, the quiet withdrawal of one foundational voice is indistinguishable from a closed door. Michael understood. Her boss understood. The firm issued a short internal statement about a strategic realignment, which is the language people use when they need to explain a failure without assigning it a face. Her boss did not fire her, but her role was restructured quietly over the following months. The high-visibility client work she had been promised evaporated. The internal transfer she had been angling for was filled by someone else. None of it was announced. It never is. It just became the shape of her days at that office. smaller and quieter than she had expected them to be. We separated in the winter. The conversation was long and honest and sad in the specific way that honest conversations about the end of something always are. She did not try to minimize what had happened at the estate. She acknowledged it directly, which I respected. She said she had not understood who I was, and I told her gently that the problem was not that she had not understood who I was. The problem was that she had not been curious enough to ask. There is a difference between those two things, and that difference is the actual distance between two people. I still have the jacket. The seam in the left pocket is still broken. I have thought about getting it repaired, and I keep deciding not to. There is something I want to keep about the fact that it is imperfect, and I wore it anyway, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Legacy does not need a nameplate. I have built things that carry no signature and will outlast every room I have ever walked into. I have reinforced walls that entire industries rest on without knowing a hand ever touched them. I do not need to be recognized in a crowd or introduced at a garden party or distinguished from the catering staff. I never have. But there is a version of being unseen that is chosen and peaceful, and there is a version that is imposed by someone who should know better. And only one of those versions is something a person can live inside without slowly losing something they cannot name, but cannot afford to lose. I know which version I was handed that evening on the gravel path beside the low boxwood hedge, with a leather clutch in my hand and her laughter moving away from me in the early summer air. I set it down. I walked toward the water, and I did not go back.